Good evening. Welcome to this webinar. My colleague Manish joins me here. We're part of the IIHS, and what we will do today is kind of dig deep into the SDGs. Manish, good evening. Thanks for joining us. I know you're in that lovely city of Delhi up in the north, but right.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah. So, Manish, we've seen the SDGs travel quite a bit, haven't we? From the negotiation rooms of the UN back home. I remember in 2015 when SDG 11 was discussed, the early seeds of it planted right in our own buildings. We've seen it in project proposals. We've seen it on the field with varying degrees of success, if you will, both at the city level, state level, national level, and beyond. We've seen it in our student presentations. We've seen it in dashboards, which seem to be quite ubiquitous across all of these. So, what I want to do today, Manish, is to quickly, in probably half an hour or so, revisit that journey of the SDGs, reprise that journey with you. So let me start, as we always do, from the beginning. What were the SDGs when they were agreed? What problems were they expected to solve? Because this is not the first time that we've had global development frameworks from a goal-based perspective. So start off from right there, will you?
Sure. Thanks. Okay, just a little bit on the SDGs. They stand for Sustainable Development Goals. They are, think of them as a global to-do list for the 2016 to 2030 period. Now, this is a set of 17 big goals that 193 UN member countries decided to jointly and severally pursue between 2016 to 2030. And the imagination was that if we achieve these goals, we would realize a prosperous, just, livable, sustainable planet. Now, that's a big ambition to have, which requires a lot of things to happen. And therefore, the SDGs cover a bunch of things. So from, let's say, ending extreme poverty and hunger, to universalizing access to health, education, water, sanitation, energy, to driving action on decent work, climate action, sustainable cities, and so on. So now, the thing with SDGs, I mean, if you look at them in totality, I think the first thing is that that through the SDGs, the world is and was aspiring to not just, well, it was driven by a realization that growth is required, but we also need the planet to be much more fair and much more green. And much more fair and much more green, not only for the people and species who inhabit the planet today, but who will inherit it in the years and decades to come. So it's a nice ambition to have. Among other things, I think there are two things that are quite important, just in terms of laying the context for the SDGs. The first is it gives the entire world, anybody who's interested in the idea of a better world, a set of goals and a set of targets to work towards. So it helps a lot of people from government, from businesses, from civil society, institutions like us to align, because we are talking the same language, we are aspiring to the same set of goals, we are working towards meeting the same set of targets. Now, what's unique about it, and you rightly said that, they were sort of, this wasn't the first time a global goal-setting exercise was done. We've had 4 decades of the UN international decades from the 1960s onwards. We have the Millennium Development Goals between 2000 and 2015. The 3 things that I think set the SDGs apart was, first, scale. All countries of the world signed up for it. Rich or poor, all of them signed up. The second was sweep. Earlier, and this had corrected itself somewhat by the time the MDGs arrived, the imagination was that somehow if we had economic growth, the world would become a fairer place, the world would become environmentally healthy place, cities would sort themselves out. But with the SDGs, we recognize that that's not an automatic thing that happens with growth. So the SDGs elevated, besides economic growth, a bunch of things to the goal level. We said, okay, economic growth is fine and we should aspire to that, but there are many other things that we should aspire to, and they need to be put at the same level as economic growth, which is what we have been chasing since the 1960s. So that was the second sort of thing that differentiated. The third thing is detail. People from government, civil society, business, academia, research, etc., they all sat down, had very messy and protracted sort of discussions and negotiations. And ultimately, we also had 169 targets associated with these 17 goals. So there were very clear targets. There were very clear goals that were crafted around finance and partnerships. And this was based on the realization that, change doesn't happen simply because of good intention. It needs money, it needs data, it needs technology, it needs cooperation. So those are the things that really set the SDGs apart. Time-bound agenda, global sweep, with a fair bit of detail. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting, Manish. On the one hand, it's a big sweep, right? It's a macro, all-encompassing space and exclusive in terms of nobody left behind.
Right.
On the other hand, we said it needs detail, it needs implementation rigor, it needs resources. In some sense, it looks like we almost tried to bite off more than we could chew, right? Because it's kind of nothing left behind. And the other way to argue it to say, did it have focus, right? But be that as it may. But if you strip the headlines out, right, in terms of its sweep, in terms of its ambition, we've been long enough into the passage and a few years left, years left than have elapsed since we started working on it. Strip the headlines, look at the real data, take stock. What does the story tell you now? Did we get there? Are we getting there? Will we get there?
So the last global stock take happened last year, 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the data has its limitations. Essentially, there is data out of the 169 data indicators. We don't have data for 30. The data that we have is not from all countries, and often it is dated anywhere between 2 to 5 years old. So there is a data limitation in commenting on that. But having said that, we still have enough data and information to be able to comment on where we are. And I think the headline bit would be that the world, and this is I'm talking on a global scale, the world is probably set to meet about 1/3 of the SDG targets. 50% of the targets, there has been some movement, but it's not enough compared to what you wanted to do. And most worryingly, there has been about 1/6 of the indicators where things have, 1/6 of the targets where things have actually slipped back. So, in a sense, the glass is 1/3 full. Now, there are some positives. It's not. So let me just start with a few positives that are there. So more people have access to safe water, safe sanitation, energy, internet, financial services than before. Maternal and child health mortality has improved. Fewer people are dying of communicable diseases. Fewer people are dying prematurely of non-communicable diseases. More children are getting into school. More children are completing school. Cities have acquired a certain prominence in national policies and so on. Climate has become a big issue and it's getting embedded in plans of governments and businesses. R&D spends are up, renewables have gone up, and per capita GDP, the amount of the resource footprint has actually come down a bit. So those are positives. Those are not small positives. The worrying part is twofold. The first is that even in these areas where we have made progress, the progress is not enough. For example, we are still very far away. Even though access has improved for water, sanitation, etc., we are still far away from meeting the universal coverage goal that we aspired to. Again, health indicators have improved, but still universal health coverage is a pretty distant prospect. schools, yes, more children in school, etc., but learning outcomes remain a concern. As far as cities are concerned, a fourth of the urban dwellers across the world actually live in uh, either very poor housing with poor services and so on. We also have, I mean, very few cities in the world where uh, transport, for example, has eased. Uh, Very few cities in the world where questions of air quality, water quality, flooding, and heat risk have not risen. Uh, Even with climate, around which there is a lot of noise, the arc of emissions actually hasn't bent decisively. So, so even where we have registered some progress, there is still a lot to do. The more worrying part, I think, is on some of the what I would call the fundamentals, where things have barely, well, the budge is very unsatisfactory, so to speak. So these are questions of poverty, inequality, gender, um,
Health, even perhaps, yeah.
health. I mean, like I said, the indicators are
Nourishment, yeah.
but there are some gaps. But on these fundamentals, I think we are fairly poorly off. For example, again, the goal of extreme poverty and ending extreme poverty is unlikely to be met at the pace at which we are going. Hunger and undernourishment have actually gone up.
Mm-hmm.
The share of labor in national income has actually come down. The share of informal work has actually gone up. And on gender equality, for example, there are many countries where discriminatory laws remain on the books. There is much violence against women and children, and women are still underrepresented when it comes to economic and political leadership. So it's so on some of the more sort of fundamental aspects, we haven't really made a very strong dent, or as much as we would have liked.
Oh,
So yeah, it's not a it's not a very positive scorecard.
yeah. Some warning lights are kind of really still glaring in it. So, because if you look at poverty, for example, it started with the MDGs itself. So it's been an ongoing challenge. But interestingly, and as the arc of the SDG played out, the global arc otherwise has also not been very favorable, right? So we had the pandemic, we have credit challenges, we have climate challenges, and now geopolitical issues as well. So, not that the SDGs could have presaged any of these, but they had to battle these as well. But given all these changes, and most of these changes have really been coming to the fore in the last decade, do you think that we should probably even relook at what meeting the SDGs mean? I mean, is there a different way to judge success given all these?
No, you're right. I mean, there was a certain assumption that there would be, when the SDGs were crafted in 2015, there was a certain sort of assumption that there would be a reasonably stable global order, that we would not be exposed to incessant shock. That growth that happened, economic growth that happened, would actually enable countries to spend more on social and climate action. These were sort of assumptions that were there, but almost all those assumptions have not held. So, like you rightly said, geopolitical tension and policy uncertainty are fairly high at the moment. We not only had the pandemic, but we have had a spate of shocks. There have been supply disruptions, there have been energy price spikes, there have been food price spikes, and climate extreme events have increased. So there's incessant amount of shock that's there in the system. The growth hasn't happened, and therefore countries which are lagging the most don't have the fiscal room to actually spend on the things that are sorely needed on the social front or on the climate front, because they are just using public money to pay off debt. And last but not the least, I think an important point is that globally, the space for dissent, debate, etc. has shrunk, which means that, for example, the ability of civil society to interrogate what's happening, to question and has the space for that has reduced considerably. So now you have a picture where there is less international lift, less money, more uncertainty, more shock, and less space for patient civil society action, and caution in the business engine. Now, if you look at all these in total, it doesn't bode very well for the SDGs. Having said that, I think it's an important thing to recognize is that we perhaps need to stop looking at SDGs as a scorecard which had to be aced.
Mm-hmm.
So and therefore, if we start looking at the SDGs as a framework which points us to where the most significant gaps are in the global betterment project and which we need to urgently act on, that might be a much more useful way of looking at the SDGs.
Yeah, that's what. So in some sense, kind of start wondering whether the framing itself need to be re-examined. I mean, like you said, it's not that it hasn't reaped its benefits. It's just that the challenges that came in, and like you said, you probably didn't foresee geopolitical tensions.
Absolutely.
But one of the challenges with anything that's long term is if you don't foresee, and then you cannot say, I didn't see it and therefore I can't solve it. Right? So you still need to kind of own up to it, it's, some sense. But yeah, just flying back to India, getting closer home. India has been part of the SDG discussion, scale, scope, complexity, diversity, all those stories around India, and how that momentum played out. But how has the SDGs worked in India, I think? Where have we cracked it? Where do we still deal with problems that continue to be wicked?
So again, the India story is somewhat mirrors the global. I mean, in terms of the overall picture, it mirrors the global story in some senses. I mean, as a summary thing, I would say as far as India is concerned, we have made some progress. The glass is filling, but the hardest bits are still left. So again, to start with the positives, poverty levels have come down. We're now at a time when a lot more people have been served with safe water, safe sanitation, energy, financial services, internet, etc. And this is partly because of the national missions that came about. So those results are showing, those numbers are showing. But again, the deeper questions are still persistent. So, for example, poverty might have declined, but a large number of people in India are still one bad harvest or one major disease episode away from going back into poverty. So there's a hell lot of precarity. The economy might have grown, but we have concerns about, and legitimate concerns about, job numbers and job quality. Youth employment is a big issue. And the jobs that are still being created are informal jobs rather than formal jobs. Even with infrastructure, we have created access. I'm not sure whether the delivery is sound. So schools might be there, but learning outcomes, we don't know. I mean, it's probably not commensurate.
Taps and water.
Same with taps. Well, exactly. You might have taps in households, but those taps might not be giving enough water or enough clean water.
Yeah.
On the gender front, we pretty much have, a lot of violence, a huge amount of discrimination in practice for all the statutes that we have in the books. And again, women underrepresented in leadership positions in business and government, etc. So, and even in climate, for example, where we have got a fairly good uptick as far as renewables are concerned. But there are other questions around water quality, around air quality, around biodiversity, around heat waves, flood, etc., which are there, which are amplified with climate change. So the India picture is good in parts, but I think the harder work for us remains. And
so where do we go? Yeah.
So where do we go in the sense? I mean, if I look at it strictly from the SDG frame, there are three things. I think we need to first stop looking at the SDGs as a trophy and a scorecard.
Big marker.
Yeah. If we were to start looking at SDGs and how they are playing out, and figure, which are the communities, which are the geographies where the gaps lie, and start directing policy attention, money, and talent to those problems, to those geographies, to those communities, we might be able to do better. That's one. The second thing is, again, the SDG sort of framing, is we need to change on the center of gravity from access to services. It's not sufficient to just create the infrastructure. The infrastructure is ultimately meant to deliver a service. And that service has to be in class, which is unfortunately not the case. So we might have created all sorts of pipelines and grids and networks, but the user experience might not be is often not as good as it should be. And the third is to look at investments in climate, in social protection, in health and education as core investments, and not as things that that can be upped or slashed depending on the fiscal elbow room that a government has. Because ultimately, it's these investments in health, education, climate, etc., which are going to help us tide over difficult circumstances and make us more resilient. So yeah, that's where we are. So not a miracle case, not a laggard either, but not a miracle case, somewhere in between, with lots of problems to be solved.
So stuck in the middle, as it were, right? So like many other countries. All right. So just moving a little bit to one of our favorite topics. We keep saying this. Back in 2015, we triggered SDG 11. We said cities need an identity. We said make it a standalone goal, right? So in some sense, it was an anomaly in the SDG listing, along with perhaps 17, which is partnerships, which also kind of cuts across. But cities tend to cut across. But what do you think of the balance for SDG 11? Why did we even need it? Why do we need to treat cities as a system rather than as just a geographical entity?
So I think by the time the world got around to drafting the SDGs, there were two things that were pretty clear. And the first was that the goals of any global betterment project would be either, whether they would be met or not, would depend a lot on what happened in cities. And that was for a very simple reason, that cities, by the time the SDGs were drafted, already hosted more than half the world's population, were accounting for more than 2/3 of the global output, economic output, and were also accounting for roughly 2/3 or more of the emissions. So it was clear that unless cities perform better, the floor wouldn't be raised. It was also clear that this momentum that cities had acquired in terms of packing in population and investment and risk, all sorts of things together, would continue. So that was one part. So cities were going to be pretty salient to whether any global betterment project would succeed or not, number one. The second realization was that the cities at that point of time when the SDGs were being crafted were not in great shape, were certainly not poised to be able to deliver the kind of boost that they would give to a project like the SDGs. At that point of time, again, about 1/4 of the world's population was living in slums with very poor housing and very poor services. The risks of flood, heat wave, etc. were compounding, commutes were crushing. There was all of that. And cities didn't seem geared enough to sort of, to be able to do what they would need to do for the SDGs to be met. Now, based on those two clarities, many of us, including people at IIHS, and there were many others involved with this project, argued that, we needed cities to be very explicitly recognized in the SDG frame. Now, that could have happened either as city-level sub-targets under various themes, health, education, water, energy, and so on. Or it could have happened as a separate goal, which is what happened. Now, the logic for doing it as a goal was that the city was not a sector, like, say, a health or education or water or energy. The city was a theater where all these systems had to work together so that the city would be well functioning and would serve its people well. So we needed that theater to be recognized. And the way to recognize it was a goal, because then it would invite attention and scrutiny and accountability, because it was elevated to the status of a goal. So that's where we that was the whole logic of elevating it to a goal thing. Uh, Now, what very simply put, I think SDG 11, I mean, shorn of all verbiage, I think aspires to do three things. It wants to make sure that um, every city dweller in the world has access to safe, affordable housing, which is well serviced with water, sanitation, electricity, and that slums and informal settlements, where these deprivations are often concentrated and the worst, cannot be brushed aside, but naturally to be upgraded. Number one. Number two is making movement of people easy. Where people can move safely, affordably, comfortably, uh, move. And the third is about making cities much more livable, much more green, and much more resilient. So more green spaces, better air quality, better, more clean surroundings, and preparedness for all sorts of risks, including flood and heat wave, which are happening regularly. So those were the three. I mean, those are the basic things that we decided to aspire towards.
So in some sense, cities feed back to the other SDGs and the other SDGs feed back to the city as well, right? So that's really where the nub of it is in terms of where it stands. So even in India, we see that urban story getting played out now, right? So look at numbers, which are quite impressive. Look at housing units, you look at highways, you look at rails, metros, even taps, right? Even though the emphasis was more rural on taps, but it's still Jal Jeevan Mission urban also played a part. So all of that seems to be quite glitzy, isn't it? Even in India, the urban story. But let's scratch that, Manish. How is India doing on cities?
So how's India doing on SDG 11 in the cities? Okay, so let's put it this way. Cities have acquired a certain importance and salience in national policy conversations and so on, which is a good thing to happen. Now, we've also seen over the last decade a massive amount of investment, over 20 lakh crore plus, which has given us, like you said, more than 1 crore affordable housing units, more than 2 crore pipe water connections, 60 lakh plus toilets, 20,000 buses, the world's third largest metro network, which is able to carry 1 crore plus passengers a day. So now those are impressive and big numbers, and without sort of undermining any of that work, this is essentially work on building urban hardware. But the SDGs were not about building urban hardware. The SDGs, the SDG 11 in particular, was about building safe, inclusive, flourishing cities, and for everyone. Now, if I look at the city experience of ours, of all the people around, I don't think we are passing the test in urban India. So, for example, for all the investment in, say, housing and taps and all that, we still have, according to the most recent estimates that the NITI Aayog has put out, anywhere between 40 to 50% of our population living in some kind of deprivation around housing, water, sanitation. So not living in the best. So, and that's a staggering number. But that's an important thing to acknowledge, that, the second thing is that, look at the experience of commute, for example, for anybody who ventures out of the house. Now, most people who do venture out in Indian cities are either pedestrians or cyclists, and the road is a very hostile environment for this. And for, and the general experience is what is it? Of a long walk, of waiting, of sitting in very cramped spaces, which burn a hole in your pocket, especially if you are a poor person. So the commute experience is nothing great. For women and for gender diverse folks, the city is still defined as the space of danger and constraint. Parks that feel unfriendly and unwelcoming, streets that feel unsafe, public transport that feels unsafe. We spoke about the taps, and that infrastructure service disconnect already exists. Even on the other aspect, for example, floods, heat waves, all air quality, emergencies, have become part of our urban calendar. So just in terms of the overall experience, I think we have a long way to go before we can claim to have made a substantial dent on SDG 11 in India. We've certainly made the hardware, which is a good base for doing lots of things, but we need to do lots of things.
Yeah, and then especially given our size, diversity, complexity, and our governance structure, right? One of the challenges we see is cities struggling with budgets because a lot of what's been driving city growth are central government schemes, right? Be it the highways, be it water, etc. So I think there's a play there as well. Uh, just cautious of time, Manish, I just want to come back to our students here in particular and tie back the SDGs to IIHS as well, because for IIHS, the SDGs has never been about content, right? It's not about telling people what SDGs are, just using them as a frame to kind of have conversations, but it's something that we've been part of shaping. It's something we've been playing a part in operationalizing through our diverse projects, and you've been working on most of them. It's something we continue to critique, and this conversation is just one example of that, but we keep doing that almost as a profession. So what's so important for us that the SDGs have become so pivotal in our discourse, as it were?
So I would say three things, Geetha. So the first is the alignment in terms of mission. So IIHS is in the business of driving sustainable, equitable, and efficient transformations. The SDG frame aligns very well with that. Now that alignment is important, but it is also important from another perspective where a lot of the sort of stakeholders will work with, whether it is people in government, whether it is prospective employers of our students, whether it is businesses, whether it is civil society, whether it is peers and knowledge institutions. We all speak that common vocabulary. So that's number one. So the SDG, and therefore we all end up barking up a single tree and trying to find a solution rather than barking up multiple trees. So that's the first level is the alignment. The second is the SDGs give us an opportunity and frame to introspect. So in whatever work we do. So for example, when we are teaching, we are always asking ourselves this question: is what we are teaching and how we are teaching it going to equip our students to move the needle meaningfully on urban issues? When we are doing all the policy and implementation work that we do under the practice umbrella, we are asking the question, whatever policy stances that we are recommending, whatever implementation models we are proposing and executing, are they, again, moving the needle properly? When we are doing research, are we asking the same question? Are our insights sharp enough? And are they traveling widely enough for people to pick them up and, make cities better? When we are training, same question. Are we training, whether it is people in government or civil society or, business, are we equipping them with the insight and the methods and the tools to do things to make cities better? So that's a frame that we constantly go back to and ask ourselves this question. Again, since you are sort of explicitly mentioned students, and this ties to the 2 points that I made earlier regarding the SDG IIHS connection. It's also important from that perspective, because a lot of places which employ our students, recognize SDGs. So government, for example, reports on it. Financial institutions try to align their investment with SDGs. Consulting firms or startups, etc., try to solve for SDGs. And now when we are working with our students, with the consciousness that we need to ensure that when they go out into the world, they are much better equipped to engage with the SDGs and all that it entails, it makes for a very nice match with what the prospective employers are looking for. So those, I would say, are the three things that sort of why SDGs matter to us.
Okay, great. So just extending that a little further, Manish, you talked about the skills and the methods and the tools, right? That forms part of the toolkit of any student. A couple of things that I keep hearing a lot about when I talk to all of you faculty folks is we also talk about mindsets and sensibilities, right? So it's not a mechanical problem to come and, I mean, the challenge like you articulated, it's not just about building a building, but it's making sure that the quality of service flows through, etc. But also understanding what needs to be provided. And that requires a certain empathy, a mindset, a sensibility. So from a sensibility standpoint, so what kind of things that you expect students will pick up when they come and study with us and then go out into the world of urban, especially given the kind of churn that they're going to see as they step out into the world?
So let me just sort of frame this slightly differently and speak a little more generally about what students can expect at IIHS.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think the first is discovery, wherein people can come from a background in engineering or commerce or law or whatever. The discovery that we like, that we sort of share, is that the problems and the issues and challenges that you are engaging with require a certain amount of respect for interdisciplinary approaches and require an appreciation of the fact that you need to engage with a whole variety of things and not what just strictly your discipline has taught you. So I think that's an important one, that discovery, that like you said, a water project is not just a water project. It's a project where you have to figure out where does the water come from, how the pipe alignment is going to happen, where the money is going to come from, how are people going to be able to afford the house connection, which might cost a fair bit, all sorts of things. So I think that discovery is something that our students should expect. That's one. The second is, I think, agency. Because the way our courses are structured and because of the people who teach those courses, our students get an opportunity to plug into what's happening in cities at a time when the scripts are and the playbooks are being written. So at this point of time, Indian cities are writing the playbooks of how they want to handle the housing challenge or water or sanitation or waste. I mean, that's a process that's happening. Now, with us, there is this opportunity to actually be part of that process, first as observers, second as participants, and engage with faculty who are actually in the process of drafting those playbooks, both on the policy side as well as on the implementation side. So that's a very strong plugin which prepares people very well for what's in store ahead. Now, just coming, the most exciting part is that this is going to present opportunities for a career in what I would call a sunrise sector, so to speak. There's already a huge demand, for people who understand cities, in government, in startups, in businesses, in consulting, in philanthropy, in CSR. So there's a huge demand. And the way we are teaching, students can expect to be very well prepared to be able to respond to that demand rather well. So that's one part. The second thing I think which is important to highlight is that this demand is not going to go anywhere. The SDGs might go into sunset by 2030, but cities are going to be very much around. The challenges that we are facing of inequality, of climate and infrastructure, all sorts of things are going to be very much around. And they will continue to enjoy policy and regulatory attention. They will continue to enjoy funding attention. They will, and therefore, this is not a sector that's going anywhere. So basically, they're also going to be entering a sector very well equipped to be able to handle it, and a sector that promises to grow and make a material difference to the world. And what we are doing essentially is preparing them at three levels. Intellectually, so they're able to navigate the change and all the complexity that that comes with it, and with the city territory as a basic. The second is preparing them emotionally in some senses, so that they have the resilience and the values to stick even when the going gets tough. And thirdly, practically, because then we are arming them with the wherewithal to pursue a rewarding and a future-proof career. So, yeah.
I want to rephrase something that you said in the middle, which is you said, of course, there are job opportunities and there are careers here in this space, right? Traditionally, when we look at services, public services, public utilities, etc., it was seen that this was the job of the government to provide its citizens, right? So, as the old expression goes, that's why I pay my taxes, right? So that's one stream of thought, and then we had this whole stream of philanthropy and CSR, which was aimed at providing these services. But from what I'm hearing you say, you're saying that there is probably corporate interest as well, because now these have become valid business propositions in some sense. Is that what you were referring to?
So I think, forget about the sort of the philanthropy and the CSR kind of space, which is coming from a certain orientation. Purely as businesses and corporate interest. Now, let's look at the larger imagination. If a city is well functioning, is able to provide good quality services and housing and efficient and safe transport, a risk contained environment when it comes to things like flooding and so on and so forth, with good air quality, it works very well for business. So there is this recognition in business that, if cities are to be places where they would like to invest in, work towards, the city needs to improve. And there is a certain interest in helping cities get there. Even because business, in a sense, realizes that inefficient cities are not going to, they're not going to make for great places to do business in. So there is that interest. Plus, I think the realization again that, productive, safe, efficient cities are good for business because people thrive, the market prospers. And so there is, besides the CSR and philanthropic interest, an interest in actually seeing cities thrive. So that's where a lot of the attention, etc., comes from.
Oh, okay. Interesting. All right. Thanks, Manish. I'm going to kind of pause our conversation here because I've asked you a fair bit of questions. Now let's see what some of our students may have in terms of questions. So Shubha, you want to kind of pull up something for us? Sorry, Manish, just want to pick up one short question. I'll just summarize the question for you. But the role of entrepreneurship in urban transformation. So any reflections on that? It's a question that came up. Because the problem seems so big, can someone start small and really make a difference?
So I think that there are two ways to look at this sort of the entrepreneurship city connection. The first is, of course, like I spoke on in response to the previous question, is that business needs thriving, efficient places to be able to look at its different growth. So there's that. Now, there is absolutely an opportunity for entrepreneurs to actually work towards things that might be that could actually drive urban transformation of the kind that we wanted. We've already seen that. So even though I'm just, it's not something that caters to everybody and so on. But for example, ride-sharing apps, food delivery, etc. They come with their watts and all that, no question about that. But the fact of the matter is that these need a city environment to thrive. They're not solving for city problems, but they need that environment to thrive. There is a huge opportunity in terms of whether it is on water, whether it is on buildings, whether it is on waste. And we see a lot of people landing up in those spaces and working. So these things have actually taken off, and in a big way. So there are, for example, startups, etc., who are working on these kind of solutions. The issue, I think, is one of scale where we still don't have an environment enabling enough for them to take off. And this is not just because of infrastructure deficits, but also because the largest buyer for some of these services is the government, and their procurement system is just not engineered to be welcoming to this kind of innovation. So there is that. But given the magnitude of problems that we have and the size of the urban class that we have and the growth that we are expecting, there is many things to be done. The creativity of business will be important to do that. It's already doing it. And I think a more responsive policy environment will actually push things harder.
Okay. So you do see a play for
Absolutely.
early stage businesses too.
It's already there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you're seeing it already. So it's not a notional thing at this point.
I mean, the one thing, of course, that, I mean, if I were to sort of elaborate on this a little bit, the one thing that we are not seeing is sufficient encouragement for the small and the nano entrepreneur to do this. So it still requires a certain amount of heft and capital and so on to be able to make a dent. And for smaller businesses, the smaller the business, the less supported it is.
Yes. Which brings me to another question. Obviously, people have been listening carefully. So we talked about the complex structure, governance structure, especially in India, and cities being the third level. And a lot of our schemes have come centrally, right? So most of our missions have been centrally driven. Cities have been struggling with their own budgets, with their own governance challenges, etc. So how do you see the dynamic between the city and the state playing a role?
Okay, so again, the city-state dynamic has already played a role in the sense that the states which were supposed to be empowering the cities haven't been very generous about it, let's put it this way. And so the state-city dynamic exists and it's lopsided. And that's prevailing reality. Now, I just want to also take this opportunity to reflect on one more thing. Since somebody spoke about finance and so on. The intergovernmental transfers that happen from either state or central level to cities are not a problem per se. I mean, cities around the world finance themselves to intergovernmental transfers. So it's not like, it's something unique to India and so on. In fact, as a proportion of GDP, India's intergovernmental transfers are lesser compared to other countries. So now the issue is that our cities are not generating enough revenues of their own. Ideally, you would want a bump in both.
Yes.
But that's on the financing side. But just returning to your question on the state-city dynamic. So the states clearly have not been very generous. There is this governance challenge where essentially we are seeing a situation where power and accountability don't align. So, for example, we look at any city and city-specific issues, it is the city government, the urban local body, which is supposed to be which is by design directly accountable to the citizens and directly answerable to them, which has the least money at its disposal, untied money at its disposal, the least amount of power and the least amount of talent. On the other hand, state-level institutions and parastatals, which are indirectly accountable, actually have all of this. So there is that disbalance, which is and of course there is the institutional fragmentation, etc., which I don't know whether we have time. But that is a very important part of the state-city dynamic, wherein the state is not generous with decentralizing authority and power, is holding on to a lot of things, even as cities which are directly accountable and so on have to live with less. So there is that disbalance that's there. Some of it could get corrected a little bit with some of the recent financial moves. The Commission has made a huge amount of transfer directly to local government. That could change. But I have my own worries on that, and maybe I don't know whether we do. I don't think we have time to discuss that.
Okay, interesting. So the city-state dynamic continues to be the federal structure kind of coming in the way, in a sense.
Though I must also add, Geetha, and this is part of the urban complexity. is that some of the most powerful changes, long-term durable changes in India, whether it is urban or rural, have actually been driven by state governments. So it's not like, of course, there is this sort of a difficult reality that urban local bodies live with when it comes to the state government. But this is not to suggest that state governments don't have the imagination or the potential to do something constructive. So I just want to sort of park it there.
Yeah. So I'm just going to kind of twist it around for a quick question. This is not from any of the people in the audience, but from me personally, Manish. So is this whole dynamic, right? City-state dynamic. So on the one side, centrally, when we looked at it, we felt that some of the states were too big to be governed efficiently, and we saw states being split. Do you think a similar argument can be made for cities? If they're smaller, they'll be able to manage themselves better? Or is there an argument at all there?
Okay, let's look at it this way. Smaller cities don't necessarily manage themselves better right now. So I think more than size, it's a question of how empowered the cities are, how well capacitated they are. And of course, sometimes some cities will become too big to manage. Many of them already are. But I don't know whether the answer to that is actually a trifurcation, bifurcation, or dividing the city into multi sort of smaller units, or whether it is to actually have a metropolitan governance arrangement that works, where things are synthesized between multiple institutions in a mega city, which by necessity, I suppose, would have certain issues that are beyond municipal boundary that also need to be contended with. So more than size, I think is the architecture that matters, and is the empowerment that matters.
Yeah, because on the other hand, I think most cities have only grown. We haven't seen cities being bifurcated while states have been. So, but great. All right, Manish, I think we just a few seconds to the clock, but this has been a lovely conversation. And thank you for opening our minds. And I'm sure the students are listening and they'll see you in class very soon.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Lovely conversation. Thanks, Geetha.
Thanks, Manish. Yeah, have a good evening. Enjoy Delhi.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.